Hi everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at Ingalls Memorial Library here in Ringe, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day we read a chapter of a book together, and eventually we finish a whole book. And the book we're reading right now is The Wind in the Willows, and it was written by Kenneth Grahame. And today is a very special week because it's National Library Week. So that means every day is kind of a different way to celebrate us and you guys and interacting virtually. And today I wanted to wear anything I had that was library related. People get me a lot of library presents because I love libraries. So right now my earrings, you can't really see, but they say, "I will Dewey decimate you," which is very silly because I wouldn't decimate anybody, but the Dewey Decimal System is what we use to catalog nonfiction books. So they're a little silly. And I'm wearing a shirt today that says Gone with the Wind, which is my very favorite book, or one of my favorites. There are just too many. And then I have these socks that say, "So many books, so little time," because that's very true. My to-be-read pile is always very large. One of the books in my pile is The Wind in the Willows. So I'm very excited to read it with you guys today. So do we know what's happening with all of our friends? This book is just all about animal friends in the wilderness. They go on adventures on the river, in the woods. And our two main friends, Water Rat and Mole, they like to spend their time boating on the river and paddling around and helping out their friends. And then Mr. Badger is a very nice old badger who lives in the woods and helps out people if he can. And they're all friends with Toad. Toad gets into the most trouble, doesn't he? He's a little eccentric. He has a lot of hobbies that he gets excited about, and then he stops and he moves on really fast. But his latest hobby got him in trouble, didn't it? That hobby was riding motor cars and learning to drive. This book was published in 1908, which was a time when cars were just starting to come out and be invented and get popular, right? So Toad got really excited about cars, but he's not a very good driver. His latest adventure got him in trouble because he stole a car, crashed it, ended up in jail, and in the last chapter he escaped from jail with the help of a very nice washerwoman who let him pose as her, and then he escaped. And then he got on a train, but the train was being pursued by the police, right? So he jumped out of the train and landed in the woods, but it was dark and cold and he didn't know where he was. So that was where we ended. Toad was lost in the woods. So let's see what happens in Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is called Wayfarers All. The Water Rat was restless, and he did not exactly know why. To all appearance, the summer's pomp was still at fullest height, and although in the tilled acres green had given away to gold, though rowans were reddening and the woods were dashed here and there with a tawny fierceness, yet light and warmth and color were still present in undiminished measure, clean of any chilly premonitions of the passing year. But the constant chorus of the orchards and hedges had shrunk to a casual evensong from a few yet unwearied performers. The robin was beginning to assert himself once more, and there was a feeling in the air of change and departure. The cuckoo, of course, had long been silent, but many another feathered friend, for months a part of the familiar landscape and its small society, was missing too, and it seemed that the ranks thinned steadily day by day. Rat, ever observant of all winged movement, saw that it was taking daily a southing tendency. And even as he lay in bed at night, he thought he could make out, passing in the darkness overhead, the beat and quiver of impatient pinions, obedient to the peremptory call. Nature's grand hotel had its season, like all the others, and the guests one by one pack, pay, and depart, and the seats at the table d'hôte shrink pitifully at each succeeding meal, as suites of rooms are closed, carpets taken up, and waiters sent away. Those boarders who are staying on until the next year's full reopening cannot help being somewhat affected by all these flittings and farewells, this eager discussion of plans, routes, and fresh quarters, this daily shrinkage in the stream of comradeship. One gets unsettled, depressed, and inclined to be querulous. Why this craving for change? Why not stay on quietly here, like us, and be jolly? You don't know this hotel out of season, and what fun we have amongst ourselves, we fellows who remain and see the whole interesting year out. All very true, no doubt, the others always reply. We quite envy you, those who stay here. But we just have engagements, and there's a bus at the door. Our time is up. So they depart with a smile and a nod, and we miss them and feel resentful. So they're talking about how animals migrate, right? Some animals stay in these woods for the summer, and then they leave and go south in the winter, right? That happens up here too. That happens here in New Hampshire. Some animals come north, and then they go south again for the winter where it's warmer. So that's what's happening now as the seasons change, right? And Water Rat's he's a little sad about it. All of his new friends and exciting lives, they're all leaving. So he's just saying, let's see how he feels. See what else he says about it. It was difficult to settle down to anything seriously with all this flitting about going on. Leaving the waterside, where rushes stood thick and tall in a stream that was becoming sluggish and slow, Rat wandered countrywards, crossed a field or two of pastures already looking dusty and parched, and thrust into the great realm of wheat, yellow, wavy, and murmurous, full of quiet motion and small whisperings. Here Rat often loved to wander. Through the forest of stiff, strong stalks he carried their own golden sky away over his head, a sky that was always dancing, shimmering, softly talking, or swaying strongly in the passing wind, and recovering itself with a toss and a merry laugh. Here, too, he had many small friends, a society complete in itself, leading full and busy lives, but always with a spare moment to gossip and exchange news about a visitor. Today, however, though they were civil enough, the field mice and harvest mice seemed preoccupied. Many were digging and tunneling busily. Others gathered together in small groups, examined plans and drawings of small flats, stated to be desirable and compact, situated conveniently near the stores. Some were hauling out dusty trunks and dress baskets. Others were already elbow-deep, packing their belongings. While everywhere piles and bundles of wheat, oats, barley, beech-masted nuts lay about, ready for transport. "Here's old Ratty," they cried, as soon as they saw him. "Come and bear a hand, Rat, and don't stand about idle." "What sort of games are you up to?" said the Water Rat severely. "You know it isn't time to be thinking of winter quarters yet, by a long way." "Oh, yes, we know that," explained the Field Mouse rather shamefacedly. "But it's always as well to be in good time, isn't it? We really must get all the furniture and baggage and stores moved out of this before those horrid machines begin clicking around the fields. And then, you know, the best flats always get picked up so quickly nowadays. And if you're late, you have to put up with anything. And they want such a lot of doing up, too, before they're fit to move into. Of course, we're early. We know that, but we're only just making a start." Sounds like they're being prepared, right? They're getting ready. "Oh, bother, starts," said the Rat. "It's a splendid day. Come for a row, or a stroll along the hedges, or a picnic in the woods, or something." "Well, I think not today, thank you," replied the Field Mouse hurriedly. "Perhaps some other day, when we've more time." The Rat, with a snort of contempt, swung round to go, tripped over a hat box, and fell with undignified remarks. "If people would be more careful," said a Field Mouse rather stiffly, "and look where they're going, people wouldn't hurt themselves, and forget themselves. Mind that hold all, Rat. You'd better sit down somewhere. In an hour or two we may be more free to attend to you." "You won't be free, as you call it, much this side of Christmas, I can see that," retorted the Rat grumpily, as he picked his way out of the field. He returned somewhat despondently to his river again, his faithful, steady-going old river, which never packed up, flitted, or went about into winter quarters. In the osiers which fringed the bank, he spied a swallow sitting. Presently it was joined by another, and then by a third, and the birds, fidgeting restlessly on their bough, talked together earnestly and low. "What, already?" said the Rat, strolling up to them. "What's the hurry? I simply call it ridiculous." "Oh, we're not off yet, if that's what you mean," replied the first swallow. "We're only making plans and arranging things, talking it over, you know. What route we're taking this year, where we'll stop, and so on. That's half the fun." "Fun," said the Rat. "Now that's just what I don't understand. If you've got to leave this pleasant place, and your friends who will miss you, and your snug homes that you've just settled into, why, when the hour strikes, I've no doubt you'll go bravely, and face all the trouble and discomfort and change and newness, and make believe you're not very unhappy. But to want to talk about it, or even think about it, till you really need— No, you don't understand." "Naturally," said the second swallow. "First, we feel it stirring within us, a sweet unrest. Then back come the recollections one by one, like homing pigeons. They flutter through our dreams at night. They fly with us in our wheelings and circlings by day. We hunger to inquire of each other, to compare notes and assure ourselves that it was all really true, as one by one the scents and sounds and names of long-forgotten places come gradually and beckon to us." "Could you stop on for just this year?" suggested the Winter Rat wistfully. "We'll all do our best to make you feel at home." You've no idea what good times we have here while you are far away." "I tried stopping on one year," said the third swallow. "I had grown so fond of the place that when the time came I hung back and I let all the others go on south without me. For a few weeks it was all well enough, but afterwards, oh, the weary length of the nights, the shivering, sunless days, the air so clammy and chill, and not an insect in an acre of it. No, it was no good. My courage broke down, and one cold, stormy night I took wing, flying well inland on account of the strong easterly gales. It was snowing hard as I beat through the passes of the great mountains, and I had a stiff fright to win through. But I never shall forget the blissful feeling of the hot sun again on my back as I sped down to the lakes that lay so blue and placid beneath me, and the taste of my first fat insect. The past was like a bad dream. The future was all happy holiday as I moved southwards week by week, easily, lazily, lingering as long as I dared, but always heeding the call. No, I had had my warning. Never again did I think of disobedience." "Ah, yes, the call of the south," twittered the other swallows dreamily. "Its songs, its hues, its radiant air. Oh, do you remember?" And forgetting the rat, they slid into passionate reminiscence while he listened, fascinated, and his heart burned within him. In himself, too, Rat knew that it was vibrating at last, that chord hitherto dormant and unsuspected. Sorry, that's very different. Dormant is like sleeping. So he didn't realize that he felt that way until the swallows were talking to him. The mere chatter of those southern-bound birds, their pale and second-hand reports, had yet power to awaken this wild new sensation and thrill through him and through with it. That one moment of the real thing work in him, the passionate touch of the real southern sun, one waft of the authentic odor. With closed eyes, Rat dared to dream a moment in full abandonment. And when he looked again, the river seemed steely and chill, the green fields gray and lightless. Then his loyal heart seemed to cry out on his weaker self for its treachery. "Why do you ever come back, then, at all?" he demanded of the swallows, jealously. "What do you find to attract you in this poor, drab little country? Why do you think?" "And do you think," said the first swallow, "that the other call is not for us too in its due season? The call of the lush meadow grass, the wet orchards, warm, insect-haunted ponds, of browsing cattle, of haymaking, and all the farm buildings clustering around the house of the perfect eaves?" "Do you suppose," asked the second one, "that you are the only living thing that craves with a hungry longing to hear the cuckoo's note again?" "In due time," said the third bird, "we shall be homesick once more for the quiet water lily swaying on the surface of an English stream. But today all that seems pale and thin and very far away. Just now our blood dances to other music." They fell a twittering among themselves once more, and this time their intoxicating babble was of violet seas, tawny sands, and lizard-haunted walls. Restlessly, the rat wandered off once more, climbed the slope that rose gently from the north bank of the river, and lay looking out towards the great ring of the downs that barred his vision further southwards. His simple horizon hitherto, his mountains of the moon, his limit behind which lay nothing he had cared to see or know. Today, to him gazing south with newborn need stirring in his heart, the clear sky over their long, low outline seemed to pulsate with promise. Today, the unseen was everything. The unknown was the only real fact of life. On this side of the hills was now the real blank. On the other lay the crowded and colored panorama that his inner eye was seeing so clearly. What seas lay beyond, green, leaping, and crested? What sun-bathed coasts, along with the white villas, glittered against the olive woods? What quiet harbors thronged with gallant shipping, bound for purple islands of wine and spice, islands set low in languorous waters? He rose and descended riverwards once more, then changed his mind and sought the side of the dusty lane. There, lying half buried in the thick, cool under-hedge tangle that bordered it, he could muse on the metalled road and all the wondrous world that it led to, on all the wayfarers, too, that might have trodden it, and to the fortunes and adventures they had gone to seek or found unseeking, out there, beyond, beyond. Footsteps fell on his ear, and the figure of one that walked somewhat wearily came into view, and he saw that it was a rat, and a very dusty one. The wayfarer, as he reached Rat, saluted with a gesture of courtesy that had something foreign about it, hesitated a moment, then with a pleasant smile turned from the track and sat down by his side in the cool herbage. He seemed tired, and the rat let him rest unquestioned, understanding something of what was in his thoughts. Knowing, too, the value all animals attach at times to mere silent companionship, when the weary muscles slacken and the mind marks time. The wayfarer was lean and keen-featured, and somewhat bowed at the shoulders. His paws were thin and long, his eyes much wrinkled at the corners, and he wore small gold earrings in his neatly set, well-shaped ears. His knitted jersey was a faded blue. His breeches, padded and patched and stained, were based on a blue foundation, and his small belongings that he carried were tied in a blue cotton handkerchief. Who is this stranger? When he had rested a while, the stranger sighed, snuffed the air, and looked about him. That was clover, that warm whiff on the breeze, he remarked, and those are cows we hear cropping the grass behind us and blowing softly between mouthfuls. There is the sound of distant reapers, and yonder rises a blue line of cottage smoke against the woodland. The river runs somewhere close by, for I hear the call of moorhen, and I see by your build that you are a fresh-water mariner. Everything seems asleep, yet going on all the time. It is a goodly life you lead, friend. No doubt the best in the world, if only you are strong enough to lead it. Yes, it's the life, the only life to live, responded the water rat, without his usual wholehearted conviction. I did not say exactly that, replied the stranger cautiously, but I'd no doubt it's the best. I've tried it, and I know. And because I've just tried it, 6 months of it, and I know it's the best, I am here, footsore and hungry, tramping away from it, tramping southward, following the old call, back to the old life, the life, which is mine, and which will not let me go. Is this, then, yet another of them? Mused the rat. Is it another traveler? Another seasonal migrator? And where have you just come from? Water Rat asked his new friend. He hardly dared to ask where he was bound for. He seemed to know the answer only well. I'm headed to a nice little farm, replied the wayfarer briefly. Up along in that direction. He nodded northwards. Never mind about it. I had everything I could want. And everything I had any right to expect of life, and more. And here I am. Glad to be here all the same, though. Glad to be here. So many miles further down the road. So many hours nearer to my heart's desire. His shining eyes held fast to the horizon, and he seemed to be listening for some sound that was wanting from that inland acreage, vocal as it was with cheerful music of pasturage and farmyard. You are not one of us, said the water rat, nor yet a farmer, nor even, I should judge, of this country. Right, replied the stranger, I'm a seafaring rat, I am, and the port I originally hail from is Constantinople, though I'm a sort of foreigner there too, in a manner of speaking. You will have heard of Constantinople, friend, a fair city and an ancient and glorious one. And you may have heard, too, of Sigurd, king of Norway, and how he sailed there with 60 ships, and how he and his men rode up through streets all canopied in honor and with purple and gold. How the emperor and empress came down and banqueted with him on board his ship. When Sigurd returned home, many of his Northmen remained behind and entered the emperor's bodyguard, and my ancestor, or Norwegian-born, stayed behind too. And the ships that Sigurd gave the emperor, seafarers we have ever seen, and no wonder. As for me, the city of my birth is no more my home than any pleasant port between there and the London River. I know them all, and they know me. Set me down on any of their quays or foreshores, and I am home again. Wow, he's traveled a lot. I suppose you go great voyages, said the water rat with growing interest. Months and months out of sight of land, and provisions running short. An allowance as to water, and your mind communing with the mighty ocean and that sort of thing. By no means, said the sea rat. Such a life as you describe would not suit me at all. I'm in the coasting trade and rarely out of sight of land. It's the jolly times on shore that appeal to me as much as any seafaring. Oh, those southern seaports, the smell of them, the riding lights at night, the glamour. Well, perhaps you have chosen the better way, said the water rat, but rather doubtfully. Tell me something of your coasting, then, if you have a mind to, and what sort of harvest an animal of spirit might hope to bring home from it, to warm his latter days with gallant memories by the fireside. For my life, I confess to you, feels to me today sometimes narrow and circumscribed. My last voyage, began the sea rat, that landed me eventually in this country, bound with high hopes for my inland farm, will serve as a good example of any of them. And indeed, as good an example of any of them. And indeed, as an epitome of my highly colored life, family troubles, as usual, began it. The domestic storm cone was hoisted, and I shipped myself on board a small trading vessel bound from Constantinople, by classic seas whose every wave throbs with a deathless memory, to the Grecian islands and the Levant. Those were golden days and balmy nights, in and out of harbor all the time, old friends everywhere, sleeping in some cool temple or ruined cistern during the heat of the day, feasting and song after sundown under great stars set in a velvet sky. Then we turned and coasted up the Adriatic, its shore swimming in an atmosphere of amber, rose, and aquamarine. We lay in wide landlocked harbors, we roamed through ancient and noble cities, until at last one morning, as the sun rode royally behind us, we rode into Venice, down a path of gold. That's in Italy, which is pretty far for a mouse to go, a rat to go from England. Oh, Venice is a fine city, wherein a rat can wander at his ease and take his pleasure, or, when weary of wandering, can sit at the edge of the Grand Canal at night, feasting with his friends, when the air is full of music and the sky full of stars. And the food, do you like shellfish? Shellfish? Well, we won't linger over that now. Venice is right on the water, so there's a lot of seafood. The new friend rat was silent for a while, and the water rat, silent too and enthralled, floated on dream canals and heard a phantom song pealing high between gray and wave-lapped walls. Southwards we sailed again at last, continued the sea rat, coasting down the Italian shore, till finally we made Palermo, where I quitted for a long, happy spell on shore. I never stick too long to one ship. Besides, one gets narrow-minded and prejudiced. Besides, Sicily is one of my happy hunting grounds. I know everyone there, and their ways just suit me. I spent many jolly weeks in the island, staying with friends up country. When I grew restless again, I took advantage of a ship that was trading to Sardinia and Corsica, and very glad I was to feel the fresh breeze and sea spray in my face once more. But isn't it very hot and stuffy down in the hold, I think you call it? Asked the water rat. The seafarer looked at him with the suspicion of a wink. I'm an old hand, he remarked. The captain's cabin is good enough for me. It's a hard life, by all accounts, murmured the rat, sunk in deep thought. For the crew it is, replied the seafarer. From Corsica, he went on, I made use of a ship that was taking wine to the mainland. We made Aliseo in the evening, lay to, hauled up our wine casks, and hove them overboard, tied one to the other by a long line. Then the crew took to the boats and rowed shoreward, singing as they went, drawing after them the long bobbing procession of wine casks, like a mile of porpoises. On the sands they had horses waiting, which dragged the casks upon the steep street of the little town with a fine rush and clatter and scramble. When the last cask was in, we went and refreshed and rested and sat late into the night, drinking with our friends. And the next morning I was off to the great olive woods for a spell and a rest. And so at length, by easy stages, and partly on foot, partly by sea, and to Marseille I went, after that, and the meeting of old shipmates, and on the visiting of great ocean-bound vessels, and feasting once more. Talk of the shellfish I ate! Why, sometimes I dream of the shellfish of Marseille, and I wake up crying. That reminds me, said the polite water rat. You happened to mention that you were hungry, and I ought to have spoken earlier. Of course you will stop and take your midday meal with me? My hole is close by. It's some time past noon, and you are very welcome to whatever there is. Now that is so kind and brotherly of you, said the sea rat. I was indeed hungry when I sat down, and ever since I inadvertently happened to mention shellfish, my hunger pangs have been extreme. But couldn't you fetch it along out here? I'm none too fond of going under hatches, unless I'm obliged to, and then, while we eat, I could tell you more concerning my voyages and the pleasant life I lead. At least it is very pleasant to me. And by your attention, I judge, it commands itself to you, whereas if we go indoors, it is 100 to 1 I shall presently fall asleep. That is indeed an excellent suggestion, said the water rat, and he hurried off home. Then he got things for a simple luncheon meal, including French bread, a sausage, out of which the garlic sang, some cheese, which lay down and cried, and some warm white sand. A long-necked straw-covered flask containing bottled sunshine, shed and garnered on far southern slopes. Thus laden, Water Rat returned with all speed, and brought the food to his new friend. The sea rat, as soon as his hunger was somewhat assuaged, continued the history of his latest voyage, conducting his simple hearer from port to port of Spain, landing him at Lisbon, Oporto, and Bordeaux, introducing him to the pleasant harbors of Cornwall and Devon. Those are in England, so he's making his way around to England. And so up the channel to that very countryside, where after winds long contrary, storm-driven and weather-beaten, he caught the first magical hints and heraldings of another spring, and, fired by these, he had sped on a long tramp inland, hungry for the experiment of life on some quiet farmstead, very far from the weary beating of the sea. Spellbound and quivering with excitement, the water rat followed the adventurer league by league, over stormy bays, through crowded roadsteads, across harbor bars on a racing tide, winding up rivers that hid their busy little towns, round a sudden turn, and left him with a regretful sigh planted at his dull inland farm, about which he desired to hear nothing. By this time their meal was over, and the seafarer, refreshed and strengthened, his voice more vibrant, his eye lit with a brightness that seemed caught from some faraway sea beacon, filled his glass with the red and glowing vintage of the south, and leaning towards the water rat, compelled his gaze and held him, body and soul, while he talked. Those eyes were of the changing foam-streaked gray-green leaping of northern seas, and the glass shone a hot ruby that seemed the very heart of the south, beating for him who had the courage to respond to his pulsation. The twin lights, the shifting gray and steadfast red, mastered the water rat and held him bound, fascinated, powerless. Do you think the water rat likes hearing the stories of the adventures? I think he's very interested. The quiet world outside their rays receded far away and ceased to be, and the talk, the wonderful talk, flowed on. Or was it speech entirely, or did it pass at times into song? Chanty of the sailors, weighing and dripping anchor, sonorous hum of the shrouds in a tearing northeaster, ballad of the fisherman hauling his nets at sundown against an apricot sky. Did it change into the cry of the wind, plaintive at first, angrily, shrill as it freshened, rising to a tearing whistle, sinking into a musical trickle of air from the leach and bellying of the sail? All the sounds the spellbound listener seemed to hear, and with them the hungry complaint of the gulls and the seamews, the soft thunder of the breaking waves, the cry of the protesting shingle. He heard of deep-sea fishings, and the mighty silver gatherings of the mile-long net, of sudden perils, noise on breakers on a moonless night. He heard the tall bows of the great liner taking shape overhead through the fog, and of the merry homecoming, the headland rounded, the harbor lights opened out, the group seen dimly on the quay, the cheery hail, the splash of the hawser, the trudge of the steep little street towards the comforting glow of red curtained windows. Lastly, in his waking dream, it seemed to the water rat that the adventurer had risen to his feet, but was still speaking, still holding him fast with sea-gray eyes. And now, he was saying softly, I take to the road again, holding on southwestwards for many a long and dusty day, till at last I reached the little gray sea town I know so well, that clings along one side of the harbor. There, through the dark doorways, you look down flights of stone steps, overhung by great pink tufts of valerian, and ending in a patch of sparkling blue water. The little boats that lie tethered to the rings and sanctions of the old seawall are gaily painted, as those I clambered in and out of my own childhood. The salmon leap on flood tide, schools of mackerel flash and play past quaysides and foreshores, and by the windows the great vessels glide, night and day, up to their moorings, and forth to the open sea. There, sooner or later, the ships of all seafaring nations arrive, and there, at its destined hour, the ship of my choice will let go its anchor. I shall take my time. I shall tarry and abide, until at last the right one lies waiting for me, and I shall slip on board, by boat or long hawser. And by one morning I shall wake to the song and tramp of the sailors, the rattle of the anchor chain coming merrily in. We shall break out the jib and the foresail, and the white houses on the harbor side will glide slowly past us, as the ship gathers steering way, and the voyage will have begun. And you will come too, young brother, for the days pass and never return, and the south still waits for you. Take the adventure, heed the call, now before the irrevocable moment passes. 'Tis but a banging of the door behind you, a blithesome step forward, and you are out of the old life and into the new. Then some day long hence, jog home here if you will, when the cup has been drained and the play has been played, and sit down by your quiet river, with a store of goodly memories for your company. You can easily overtake me on the road, for you are young, and I am aging and go softly. I will linger and look back, and at last I will surely see you coming, eager and light-hearted, with all the south in your face. Do you think he's going to go? The voice died away and ceased, and as an English tiny trumpet dwindled swiftly into silence, and the water rat, paralyzed and staring, saw at last but a distant speck on the white surface of the road. Left. Is Water Rat going to go with him? Do you think he wants to? Mechanically, Water Rat rose and proceeded to repack the luncheon basket. Mechanically, he returned home, gathered together a few small necessaries and special treasures he was fond of, put them in a satchel, acting with slow deliberation, moving about the room like a sleepwalker, listening ever with parted lips. He swung the satchel over his shoulder, and with no hesitation at all, he stepped across the threshold just as Mole appeared at the door. "Why, where are you off to, Ratty?" asked the Mole in great surprise, grasping him by the arm. "I'm going south with the rest of them," he said. "Seawards first, and then on shipward, and on to the shores that are calling me." He pressed resolutely forward, still without haste, but with dogged fixity of purpose. But for the Mole, now thoroughly alarmed, he placed himself in front of him, and looking into his eyes saw that they were glazed and set and turned a streaked and shifting gray, not his friend's eyes, but the eyes of some other animal. Grappling with him strongly, he dragged him inside, threw him down, and held him. The rat struggled desperately for a few moments, and then his strength seemed suddenly to leave him, and he lay still and exhausted. Presently the Mole assisted him to rise and placed him in a chair, where he sat collapsed and shrunken into himself, his body shaken by a violent shivering, passing in time into a hysterical fit of dry sobbing. Mole made the door fast, threw the satchel into a drawer and locked it, and sat down quietly on the table by his friend, waiting for the strange time to pass. Gradually the rat sank into a troubled doze, and then he passed into a deep slumber. Very anxious, the Mole left him for a time and busied himself with household matters. It was getting dark when he returned to the parlor and found the rat where he had left him, wide awake indeed, but listless, silent, and dejected. He took one hasty glance at his friend's eyes, found them, to his great gratification, clear and dark and brown again as before, and sat down and tried to cheer him up and help him to relate to what happened to him. Poor Ratty did his best to explain things, but how could he put into cold words what had mostly been suggestion? How recall, for another's benefit, the haunting sea of voices that had sung to him? How reproduce at second hand the magic of the seafarer's 100 reminiscences? Even to himself, now the spell was broken and the glamour gone, he found it difficult to account for what had seemed, some hours ago, the inevitable and only thing. It is not surprising, then, that he failed to convey to the Mole any clear idea of what he had been through that day. To the Mole, much was plain. The fit or attack had passed away and had left him sane again, though shaken and cast down by the reaction. But he seemed to have lost all interest for the time in the things that went up to make his daily life, as well as in all pleasant forecastings of the altered days and doings that this changing season was surely bringing. Casually then, and with seeming indifference, the Mole turned his talk to the harvest that was being gathered in, the towering wagons and their straining teams, the growing ricks and the large moon rising over bare acres dotted with sheaves. He talked of the reddening apples, of the browning nuts, of jams and preserves, and the distilling cordials, till by easy stages such as these he reached midwinter, the hearty joys and snug home life, and then he became simply lyrical. It is nice when it turns into fall, isn't it? The changing leaves, the pumpkins and apples. I think Water Rat really does like that. By degrees, the rat began to sit up and join in. His dull eyes brightened, and he lost some of his listless air. Presently, the tactful Mole slipped away and returned with a pencil and a few half-sheets of paper, which he placed on the table. "It's been quite a long time since you did any poetry," he remarked. "You might want to have a try at it this evening, instead of, well, brooding over things so much. I've an idea that you'll feel a lot better when you've got something jotted down, even if it's only just the rhymes." The rat pushed the paper away from him wearily, but the discreet Mole took occasion to leave the room, and when he peeped in again some time later, the rat was absorbed and deaf to the world, alternatively scribbling and sucking the top of his pencil. It is true that he thought a good deal more than he scribbled, but it was joy to the Mole to know that the cure had at last begun. And that was the end of chapter 9. Thanks for reading with me. That was quite a chapter. Do you think Water Rat would have kept going if Mole hadn't come along? Water Rat was pretty entranced by those adventures that his new friend had on the seas. Sometimes it's nice to think about other places and going on adventures, but being home is always best, I think. At least that's what Water Rat thinks too. Thanks for reading that story with me. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock we'll listen to chapter 10 and we'll see what happens next. I wonder what happened to Toad. Do you think they're going to tell us? I hope so. Have a fun day.